Good evening, and welcome to the Burnsville Parks and Natural Resources Commission meeting for June 6, 2016. Our first item of business is to approve the agenda this evening. Are there any items that commissioners would like to add or amend for the agenda this evening? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
All in favor?
Second.
Second, and all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I as well, and the motion carries. Our second item this evening is for citizen comments. Is there anyone who would like to address the commission this evening? Seeing none, that brings us to the next item on our agenda, which is to approve the minutes from the previous meeting, May 2nd. Do commissioners have anything they'd like to add or amend for the previous minutes? Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye as well, and the motion carries. That brings us to the fourth item of the evening, which is a public hearing and a review of Burnsville's Storm Water Pollution Prevention Program and 2015 Annual Report. Our presenter this evening is Ron Leaf.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm going to talk to you about the city's NPDES annual report for the calendar year 2015. Most or all of you, I think, have heard this in some form in years past, and this will be very similar, but try to add a few additional project examples to let you see some of the things that, and one significant project that was completed in 2015. Where am I at here? There we go. So I'm going to talk briefly about just a quick overview and background of the program, touch on Burnsville's MS4 permit, really the structure of the permit and what that permit looks like, talk about the status of compliance, highlight some of the 2015 activities. In your packet, the entire MPCA form annual report is included. I'm not going to go through that in detail, but I will highlight a few things. And then we'll take a quick look forward at some things that are happening this year and then in future years. So, as we've talked in past years, this is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. Comes with plenty of acronyms. It's Clean Water Act established it. It's administered locally in Minnesota by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And the city of Burnsville has had permit coverage under this program since 2003. And that permit was updated in 2006, again in 2013. It's generally a 5-year permit renewal cycle, give or take, depending on if there's any issues or challenges to the permit as part of MPCA's process. So we could expect another permit cycle to come through sometime in the 2018, 2019 timeframe. Burnsville's permit, just like all of the other 240-ish MS4s, or municipal separate storm sewer system permittees, are required to have this format, which is a stormwater pollution prevention program, which is made up of 6 minimum control measures, or MCMs, and a number of best management practices, or BMPs, under each of those. And each BMP comes with 1 or more measurable goals. And I don't know why measurable goals doesn't have the acronym, but that certainly could as well. So the minimum control measures, 6 of them, as I mentioned: public education and public participation, the first 2. Really what this meeting tonight falls under, that MCM number 2, public participation and involvement. Permit requires that cities provide an opportunity for public participation and involvement. Number 3 there, illicit discharge. 4 is construction site runoff control, really the erosion and sediment control practices on sites. Post-construction runoff, those things like rain gardens, sump manholes, ponds. And then 6 is the pollution prevention good housekeeping for municipal operations, which is really how the city's public works staff go about their daily business of maintaining the drainage system and cleaning ponds and so on. The city of Burnsville also has an additional requirement because of some impaired waters review and tracking procedures. And that's just an annual thing. We need to kind of keep track of what practices have been installed and what practices the city gets credit for under that impaired waters program. The annual reporting process covers the calendar year from January 1st to December 31st, and the report must be submitted online by June 30th, 2016. Now, last year's permit, the 2015 permit, which is in your packet, annual report, I should say, has already been submitted. This public meeting is really to gather input on the program as a whole, and then those comments would be considered as part of the next cycle's annual report. That's a change from a couple of years ago where everybody kind of operationally looked at the public meeting just before the annual report as what things would be included in the annual report. But as part of that 2013 permit update, MPCA clarified that no, report on the calendar year and then just talk about the meeting that took place last year. So as part of this, the June 1st, 2015 meeting was addressed in the 2015 annual report. As part of the permit, it's required that the city staff do a self-assessment of compliance and look for areas that may or may not have met the requirements of the permit. In this case, the city has met the requirements of the permit for the 2015 reporting year. And in fact, in February, the MPCA audited the city's program and determined that the city was in compliance. So good news there. MPCA audits a number of cities every year, but in general, it's probably certainly much longer than a 5-year audit cycle. Right now, I think they're on about maybe 8 to 10 years before they would get to all the permittees. So that step should be done at least for a while. I'm going to walk through some highlights by the minimum control measures. This table for public education and outreach was taken from the annual report submitted on the MPCA form. And as you can see, the city does a number of things ranging from publishing brochures and newsletters. Over on the right-hand column there, you see the circulation and the audience that these things potentially reach. As you move down on the left-hand side, the cable access channel to a number of things like this meeting and school projects or presentations go out to people. City staff reach these groups and talk about stormwater projects and activities. The website gets broad circulation. And then more recently, the social media with Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube is something that many cities, including Burnsville, are doing more of to better reach the people that are using these tools to access and provide input and look at information. So the city's doing a great job in the public education and outreach and giving people the opportunity to see and learn about this program. Public participation involvement. So the permits become more flexible in how cities can meet this public input requirement. In the past, it was you must hold at least one public meeting annually. The permit that was revised in 2013 and as cities updated their programs for 2014 and 15, actually, as part of the audit, MPCA suggested that the city look at some different options for getting public input because of the difficulty sometimes in getting people to attend and participate in these public open houses. So MPCA recognized that challenge and modified the permit to be more open to looking at other methods. So in the old case, this was kind of the format that public input, public opportunity for comment would be at a public meeting. In the future, what the city's looking at doing is seeking input at, for example, annual tree sale and or native plant market event to go out to the residents that might have more of an interest and be visible and actually seek input at those events to reach the people instead of waiting for them to show up at a meeting like this. So that's a change and something that, as noted there in the second set of bullets, so this tonight would be the final public meeting of this group to kind of go over this program. And then in the future, it would just be how many residents were reached at these various public events. Illicit discharge detection and elimination. Public Works staff annually inspects all the outfalls and maintains an illicit discharge hotline to kind of understand where discharges may have occurred. There were actually 5 illicit discharge identified in 2015. 2 of those were reported by the public and 3 were identified by staff. So that number's up, and you look at that as that's probably a good thing because people are more aware. They're seeing things. You're getting some reports of people seeing things that shouldn't be going into the storm sewer. So having that number up, you can look at that as good or bad, but certainly a good sign that people are being aware of what's happening out in the landscape. And staff follow up on all of these. None of the 5 were significant issues and were addressed promptly. Is there a question?
Yeah, could you tell us what the 2 are reported by the public issues?
I don't know which 2 were reported by the public. I can tell you the breakdown. There were 2 that were broken paint containers that were left in the roadway, so paint was spilling into the roadway. 1 was an auger boring, so when somebody does a soil boring, that auger boring material, kind of a clay mud material, was just left to discharge into the curb towards the storm sewer. There was 1 that was engine oil from a car that had a little puddle in the street, probably less than a quart, but still, so that was probably 1 that was reported by the public, but I don't know that for sure. And then there was 1 that was hydraulic fluid from a garbage truck in a residential area. So quite a mix of things.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So construction site, stormwater controls, a couple of different categories of projects here. The 10 projects were greater than an acre that were reviewed, and on those 10 projects, there were 29 inspections. That 1 acre threshold is what MPCA asked for because that's what their program requires. However, in the table below, those inspection summary for notices of violations and correction notice, those are for all sites throughout the city that were inspected and by city staff. So you see that the notice violation and others were the same number. Really staff, that's kind of a verbal notice, which is also documented, and those are generally promptly taken care of. There were 2 that rose to the level of staff withholding a certificate of occupancy prior to that property addressing their construction site erosion issues. With post-construction stormwater management for new and redevelopment, typically this is those rain gardens or other stormwater practices that are installed by developers. In this case, the picture shows a project that the city initiated, a reconstruction, improvement and enhancement of a pond just west of 35W and south of the railroad tracks by Lady Bird Lane. And this was a pond that had a pretty large diameter, I don't recall how, probably close to 100 acres that drained to it, shallow bedrock right below it. And so there was a potential for this stormwater to seep into the ground right next to the surface water intake on the other side of the railroad tracks. So this project actually involved expanding the capacity of the pond and putting a clay liner in to protect that surface water drinking source of the cities. And then it also provides this regional treatment capacity for future redevelopment in that project area. So just an example of a project the city did under this category of post-construction projects. For good housekeeping, this part of the annual report shows that the first line there, structural stormwater BMPs, how many the city owns, 99 of them. And then the second set of numbers shows how many were inspected last year. So in this case, all of the 99 structural BMPs were inspected. And that is required by the permit. For the outfalls, the city inspected 96 of the 206. That requirement is that the city inspect at least 20% in any year, or that 100% of them are inspected on a 5-year basis. So again, the city met that. And then the same thing for ponds. It's required that all of them be inspected on a 5-year basis. So all 384 of those have been inspected already this 5-year permit cycle. So city staff will get back to those at some point in the future. One project under this city operations maintaining the system that the city implemented was a improvement and a repair of a Black Dog Park slope failure. This project was between Black Dog Park and up above at Bluff Court. So you can see the storm sewer in the middle of the picture. There is a corrugated metal pipe that failed like they do over time. They rust out and can start to seep. In this case, it was a pretty severe failure because the slope around it, on the order of 10 feet deep in spots, also failed. And that sediment then ended up in the parking lot down below and had to be cleaned up a couple of times. And you can see here in a couple of pictures that, yes, it's a discharge to downstream areas, but it's a water quality issue as well as a function of the system issue, because you can see the sediment has effectively plugged these storm sewer conveyance systems that are needed to move the water out when it's time. So a pretty severe issue due to a failing pipe. I will say that the city does have a program to repair these pipes before this happened. This one just was not identified as part of that until this happened. So the repair then looks something like this. So the slope was fully vegetated. A new HDPE plastic pipe was installed from the top to the bottom, and then the slope restored with vegetation and a couple of rock check dams to help slow any overflow that might not get into the storm sewer system. Quickly, a few next steps. Certainly there's opportunity to provide input, and that input, as I mentioned earlier, would be considered for possible program modifications the rest of this year, and then would be addressed if there are any changes implemented with the report for the 2016 calendar year. That is all I have, and if you have questions or comments after tonight, you can direct them to Ryan Peterson. Otherwise, I'd be happy to answer any other questions you have at this time.
Thank you. I think before we go to the public hearing, we'll take comments and questions from the commissioners. So commissioners with questions and comments.
I just have a quick question on the drains themselves. I know the city has a stenciling program, and I know our lake association put labels on them, but I've also noticed you've been doing some maintenance or replacement of the grates around the lakes, and some of them have the drains to lake kind of etched right into the grate. I'm just wondering what the policy is. Does anything within a mile of the lake gets that if they replace it, or?
Okay, so my understanding is anything adjacent to the lake would get that.
So they're direct runoff?
Yep, directly to the lake.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay, yes, Commissioner Nachman?
With, what was it, 360 ponds or 390?
384, I think. was the number.
84?
Yep.
Thank you. I'll remember that. The question is, why wasn't this spread over a 5-year period? If in one whole year, no ponds were looked at, instead of recycling it? Was it just done all in one big swoop?
I'm not sure I have the exact answer to that. I do know that some operationally, efficiency sometimes, many cities will look at it as, let's do our inspections so we know what issues we need to address over the 5 years. And so do all the inspections, identify what problems are there, and then that gives you a better time frame to highlight and address the most severe issues. I don't know that that was the reasoning behind this, but I do know that other cities do it in that manner.
Are there any reports available on the individual ponds?
There are reports available for each pond inspection, and those.
How does one find out? what the
We can
report
certainly,
is?
I can certainly talk to Ryan Peterson tomorrow, and we can make those, see how those could be available.
And the second part of that, could you explain what the quote inspection is?
The inspection of a pond would involve staff visually looking at all of the storm sewer inlets and outlets. So any pipe coming into, first they bring a map out into the field that shows them where the inlets and outlets should be. They'll visit the pond and look at where are those inlets, try to find them. And I say try to because sometimes they might be full of sediment and hard to find. If they are hard to find, that would be an indicator that that pond needs some maintenance or that pipe needs some maintenance. So first and foremost, the pipes in and out of the pond. Secondly, they'll look for accumulations of sediment visually. So sometimes you'll see at an outlet or near an outlet into a pond, ducks or geese standing in inches of water where that pond should be 4 feet deep. It's only inches deep, so they'll make a note that sediment accumulation at the outlet, program in for a future pond cleanout.
How do you determine the clarity of the water 4 feet deep when their ponds are, the sediment in some of the ponds are probably 4 or 5 feet below the water level? And specifically, near Wind Cave Court, there's a pond that used to be about 14 feet deep, and there's a whole bunch of sediment at the bottom over the years. And if you just go and look at it, that isn't exactly what I would call an inspection.
Sure. The city has another tool that they use to assess conditions like that, because as you indicate, it's not always obvious through a visual inspection that a pond might need sediment cleanout. So the city has a tool that they've used to look at prioritizing pond cleanout program based on the estimated sediment accumulation in a pond. How long has the pond been there? What's the drainage area to the pond? What's the land use to the pond? And so based on those factors, you can get a pretty good estimate of what the likely sediment load into the pond over time is. And then you can prioritize that based on, when is it time to do a pond clean out so you can return the function of the pond to its intended use. So that's the second tool that the city uses.
Do you ever test the water for quality or?
For stormwater ponds, I'm not aware that the city ever does any water testing, any water quality testing of ponds.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I'm just wondering why not with some of the ponds. There was one pond that, again, on Wind Cave Court, that's the bottom of a sort of drainage of a very large area, and the storm drain water just pours in that. And it, the pond is, I guess I would just describe it as not very clear and full of bad stuff that's in there. And I just like to know more about what the inspection, and particularly that one pond, since I'm pretty much live on that.
So there's a couple of things. Certainly, we can see what inspection reports are available for that, as well as seeing where that would fall within the pond cleanout program priority system that the city has.
Thank you.
Additional comments, questions from commissioners?
Just one question. So how does somebody can report if there's an oil spill or something else? And is there a minimum that somebody wants to make a phone call, as you were talking about, if there was a spill of a quart of oil? Just to be a good citizen, is there a gauge that somebody can say, hey, I just found a bottle or a quart of something on the side of it? What is the recommendation for a citizen, and where can they report something through the website, or do you have to make a phone call?
The primary source is the city's hotline. The city has a hotline, numbers posted on the city's website.
Okay.
So look on the website. I would say in general, if it doesn't look right, make the call, have somebody come and look at it. So in that sense, no, there's not a minimum amount.
Okay.
I think it's a matter of if you see a small amount that somebody's doing something with, let's catch that and make sure it's not a larger amount next time. There is a level that rises to the need of notifying the state duty officer, and that's, I think, 5 gallons. I think it's a threshold there. But in this case, I think it's, if you see something that doesn't look right, something that shouldn't go into the storm system, certainly make the call to the city's hotline.
Yes, Commissioner Johnson?
This is probably more for JJ. Since this will not be a public hearing in the future at this meeting, can we still have reviews or reports of the stormwater?
Commissioner Johnson, I believe, will we still be receiving this report on an annual basis?
That was not the original intention.
Yeah, I think the intent was to go out and
Yeah,
get
but-
input, so.
Would this commission still be able to have a review of it? Just, because there's obviously a lot of passion around the stormwater drains with this group.
I think staff are very open to any
Okay.
suggestions you might have on how best to keep you in the loop and get your input specifically.
Thank you.
Again, Commissioner Nachman?
How many ponds over the last 5 years were treated, meaning the bad stuff was taken out?
I don't have that number offhand, but could certainly get that, and Daryl or,
We average 3 to 5 a year.
okay. About 3 to 5 a year is kind of the rough average of how many are cleaned out, sediment cleanouts.
Is there, I guess what I'm saying is, in giving a report with this big numbers, there's no detail, so it's very hard to determine, what really is going on, and what ponds having so many receive treatment. And are there criteria for determining which ponds need to be retreated?
The criteria under the NPDES permit program that MPCA establishes for the permittees is that the city must develop and implement a program to address pond maintenance. So the city has developed this tool to assess the effectiveness of all 384 ponds, as well as completed the inspections. So that's the city's process to assess, prioritize, because the second step is, when do you go out and clean them out? And that's as much how much funding do you have, because if you find different levels of contamination, the funding levels may not support cleaning out 3 to 5 ponds a year, let alone 10 or 20 ponds a year. So the city has that program in place, and that meets or exceeds the permit requirements.
I appreciate your answer, but it lacks details for a presentation like this, and that's what I was really looking for.
Yeah, hi, Daryl Jacobson, Natural Resources Manager. Ron actually answered it quite well. The presentation that we're giving tonight as part of this public hearing is to show that we're meeting the MPCA's requirements for the NPDES permit. It's not necessarily a presentation on our entire stormwater management operation in necessarily that level of detail. We have done presentations like that before, sometimes in work sessions and sometimes at a meeting like this, where, you know, we've brought additional information on this subject. But, you know, for the presentation tonight, that's why the material is in there, is we're trying to meet the requirements of the permit.
Thank you, Dale Jacobson. I do have a question in light of the public nature of the hearing that other people might be wondering about. And something that's been in the news is the toxic blue-green algae that's showing up in Minnesota waters. And I'm wondering if that's something that is tested for. I know that those algal blooms can kind of pop up intermittently and then go away suddenly, and depending on the weather, and we have some hot days coming up here. So I'm wondering for the public, if there's a way that that's tested, and if there are reports and warnings about when that's happening in different ponds across the city.
So for the blue-green algae, you know, the dangerous kind, really dogs are more likely to get sick from it than humans, but there probably is a chance that a human could get sick. I am not an expert on all the different strains of blue-green algae and how they operate, but we don't currently test for it, and my understanding is that it can change literally hour to hour on the concentrations, just because, you know, you've got a blue-green algae in a pond or a lake, and you've got wind and other factors that cause the dilution or concentration of that. And so even if you were to test for it, by the time you got the results, they likely would be inaccurate from what's currently, you know, in that pond or in that lake, and it can even be specific to a certain portion of the lake. So if you tested, you know, several areas, you might find out those tests come back and they're low, but it doesn't mean that they're low in the whole lake. It's you know, it can be concentrated to one little corner if it's protected, or, you know, it could move around by the wind and go to another location potentially. That's my understanding of it. So that's why we don't test. It's very hard to I think, provide any useful information from those tests. It's just, but it is rare. I will say it's rare to have those instances. I'm not aware of any in Burnsville, but certainly they've been around other locations, and it could happen here.
Okay, thank you for that information. Anything else from commissioners? I have one more small question. You had a photo where you were restoring a slope that had been washed away, and you had vegetated that slope, and I'm wondering, what did you vegetate it with?
That vegetation was a native woodland seed mix, so it's native seeds for a woodland setting such as what you see there. So.
Good answer. Thank you. That's what I was hoping to hear. Okay, if there's nothing else from commissioners, I would like to formally open up the public hearing portion of this report. If there's anybody who would like to come forward and express their concerns or share comments at this time. Seeing no one wishing to comment, I would like to formally close that public hearing segment. And is there anything else that you would like to share with us in summary?
Nothing other than just to recap that the city's doing a great job, and you know that audit is a reflection of the city meeting the requirements of the program and doing a nice job there.
Thank you. And I think then from the commission, we're looking for a motion to accept this report to move this forward.
So
Do I have a motion? I have a motion. Do I have a second? And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye as well, and the motion carries. Thank you very much for your time and your presentation.
Thank you.
That brings us to the next item on our agenda, which is to review the 2015-2016 Annual Deer Management Report and propose strategies for the next year. Our presenter is Caleb Ashling.
Okay, thank you for having me, Commissioners. As mentioned, my name is Caleb Ashling. I'm a natural resources technician for the city, and I'll be presenting on the annual report for our deer management program. So I'll be reporting on our 2015-2016 program year, which runs from April 1st, 2015 until March 31st of 2016. And then I'll also be covering recommendations for our upcoming 2016-2017 program year. And just a little bit of background on our program. So the city's deer management program was passed by City Council in 2001, and it's intended to address a few issues related to high deer populations in suburban environments. One is the negative impact to natural areas that can occur from deer overbrowsing at high population levels, both to the native plant community and also to tree regeneration. And then it's also intended to address issues with deer-car collisions, landscaping depredation by deer, and then the potential for disease risk in the deer population at high densities. Now, our deer management program has 4 different components. The first is the education component, and then there's a feeding ban component, a monitoring component, and a population control component, and I'll be covering each of those components separately. For the education component, we do have information on our city website related to our deer management program. And then we also periodically put articles in the city newsletter, the Burnsville Bulletin, related to deer issues, especially related to our no deer feeding ordinance, to make sure residents are aware of that. And then the city does have a feeding ban or no deer feeding ordinance, and we monitor for compliance with that. And there were no feeding violations documented in 2015. And our recommendation is to continue monitoring and to send action letters as needed. And for the monitoring portion of the program, we can break that down into several different sections. We do our aerial count every year to census the population. We have monitoring forums for residents to report deer observations or issues. Then we compile car deer crash information, and then we also conduct a deer exclosure survey at Terrace Oaks Park. For our aerial counts, we conduct a survey by helicopter every year, and our survey was conducted this year on February 17th, and there were 56 deer counted. And for your general information about the program, when we talk about our deer management program, we break the city into 6 different management zones that are all managed separately. So we have a northeast zone, a northwest zone, a west central, east central, southwest, and southeast zone. And for our aerial survey, on the left hand, the map shows where we saw deer during the survey. So the circles indicate a location where deer were observed, and the number within the circle indicate the number of deer observed at that location. And then on the right hand side here, we have a table that shows how many deer were observed per management unit with our 2015 information compared to our 2016 aerial survey. And as you can see with the totals at the bottom of that table, we had a lower population survey than past years. Part of that may have been due to the mild winter that we had. So with low snow cover, deer were less herded up than they typically would be during the winter, which means they're in groups of 1s and 2s more often than larger groups. That makes them harder to census. Then also deer do move periodically outside the city and then back into the city. For example, we observed a group of 13 deer during the survey that were just outside of our count boundaries in the Apple Valley side of Alamagnet Park. We know that those deer do sometimes come into the city of Burnsville, but they just didn't happen to be there at that particular time. So variables like that can impact the survey, but our survey is our minimum count, population count for the city, and it's a great baseline for us to make management decisions for deer management. And then on to our citizen-submitted monitoring reports. So we do have a website where residents can submit their general observations related to deer, depredation issues related to deer, or carcass reports of deer along roadways. And we had 8 reports that were submitted this past program year. 2 were general observations, 4 were depredation reports, and 2 were carcass reports. And those reports were submitted for the East Central Management Zone, the Southeast Zone, and the Southwest Zone. Then we compile deer car crash data every year. To do this, we review City of Burnsville police records, state police records, county records, and then also our animal control contractor pickup records. And then we cross-reference that information to remove any overlapping reports. And we had 32 total deer car crashes that were reported or had an animal control pickup this past program year. This was down from 41 deer car crashes last year, and then down from historical highs at the beginning of the program around 2001 of 60 or 70 car crashes per year. The largest number of crashes occurred in the Southwest Management Unit with 13 deer. The East Central Unit had 7 car crashes, and then the rest of the car crashes were fairly distributed between the other units. So as I mentioned, the city conducts a deer exposure study at Terrace Oaks Park. This study was initiated in 2001 and has been surveyed ever since then. We have 6 study plots. Some are fenced to prevent deer from accessing the vegetation, and then some are unfenced. And the purpose of our study is to monitor the impacts of deer browse on vegetation. And then along with that, we also have some plots that have the invasive shrub common buckthorn removed, and some where buckthorn hasn't been removed. So we're also looking at the impacts of common buckthorn. And we have information from the study compiled here, and some of the information that we found was that deer appear to reduce the overall vegetative cover of native plants. So we found within our fence plots where deer couldn't access, we had a 94% coverage on average per year of understory native plant species, versus in our unfenced plots where we had 64% native plant cover. And I should mention that for our study, we have been conducting deer management throughout the course of the study duration. This doesn't necessarily represent what would happen if we had extremely high deer populations. This just documents that there are impacts to the vegetation from deer, but we'd expect if we had extremely high deer population in this area to have even a greater difference between the fenced and unfenced plots. And then we also found that deer reduce the vegetative cover of specific native plant species more so than others. One example of that was the native shrub gooseberry. In our fence plots, we had about 11% coverage of gooseberry per year on average. And then in the unfenced plots, only about 2% coverage. So deer appeared to be preferentially feeding on certain species more so than others and having a greater impact on those species. And then just really quickly on the buckthorn results from our study, we found that plots with mature buckthorn had less native plant diversity. So if buckthorn was present, we had about 8.5 native plant species per year on average. And then if buckthorn had been removed, we had about 12 native plant species per plot. So we got better native plant diversity when buckthorn was removed. And then along those lines, if buckthorn was removed, we had more yearly percent cover of native plant species, with around 97% coverage of native plant species when buckthorn had been removed, compared to about 61% coverage of native plant species when buckthorn was present. And our recommendations for monitoring is to revise our current deer exposure survey study. So we feel that it's well established at this point that buckthorn has a negative impact on the environment, so we'd like to introduce some new variables to our study. One is controlled burning, which we do for habitat restoration purposes in the restoration at Terrace Oaks Park, and then also supplemental native plant seeding. So we can get an idea of how some of these common management techniques are affecting the native plant community and how deer may also be impacting these common restoration techniques. And then we also recommend continuing our other monitoring methods. Now, moving on to our population control component of the program, we have several strategies related to population control. One is archery hunting on private land where possible. Another is archery hunting on public land, and then sharpshooting if necessary. For our archery program, we do encourage archery hunting on private property where possible. Most private property archery hunting in Burnsville occurs in southwest Burnsville, where people have larger lots. And then there is also some archery hunting that we're aware of that occurs on private property, where businesses own large acreages in northwest Burnsville by the landfill area and also in northeast Burnsville. And then we also operate archery hunts on public land where possible. Currently, the one archery hunt that we've been operating is at Kelleher Park in southwest Burnsville. So for our archery hunt at Kelleher Park this past program year, there were 10 deer harvested. This archery hunt is conducted in conjunction with the Metro Bow Hunters Resource Base, which is a nonprofit organization that helps cities conduct archery hunts in suburban parks. Then the Three Rivers Park District also operates their own archery hunt at Murphy-Hanrahan Park, which is partially in the city of Burnsville, but mostly just adjacent to the city of Burnsville. And they had 15 deer harvested during their hunt last year. And since a portion of the park is within Burnsville, we do consider 2 deer from their hunt as having been harvested within the city for tracking purposes for population counts. Now for sharpshooting, we utilize our Burnsville Police Department sharpshooters. And this past program year, there were 29 deer harvested in several different management zones within the city. And although the purpose of our program is not to donate venison, we were lucky to be able to establish a partnership with our organization here in Burnsville, the 360s Communities Food Shelf, to donate the venison here in town to needy individuals. And through the program, there's 1,400 pounds of venison donated this past program year. So this table here shows the removal goals for our 2015-2016 program year, and then the actual harvest that occurred. Our population goals are based on a 15 to 25 deer per square mile of preferred habitat density. And that was developed when the program began in 2001, and that 15 to 25 deer per square mile population level is what research has shown woodland areas can sustain, and you can still have healthy native plant communities and natural tree regeneration. So in the Northwest unit, we currently have no accessible property to do sharpshooting, so there is no possibility of doing any work in that area. In our West Central unit, we had a goal of 17 to 20 deer to harvest, and 10 deer were harvested. In the Southwest unit, 24 to 41 deer was the goal, and there were 12 deer harvested in that area, and those were harvested through our archery program. In the Northeast unit, we had a goal of up to 18 deer, and 10 deer were harvested. In East Central, goal of up to 4 deer, no deer harvested in that zone. And then in the Southeast unit, the goal was 9 to 12 deer, and 9 deer were harvested. In all total, there were 41 deer harvested either through sharpshooting or the city's archery hunts. And this table shows our recommended harvest for the upcoming program year. And we base this off our aerial survey that was conducted in February. And we take our aerial survey numbers and we project some fawn reproduction added into the population. And then we also factor in some mortality during the winter and in the summer. And from that, we come up with our projected fall population. And we use that to determine whether any management is needed. So because we did have a lower aerial count this year, we only have 2 management areas where we recommend doing harvesting. And one is the Southwest Management Unit, and the other is the East Central Management Unit. And both of these areas have active restoration projects where the city is doing work on oak woodland or oak savanna areas. In the Southwest Unit, it's at Kelleher Park, where we have an active restoration project. And in the East Central Unit, it's at Terrace Oaks Park, where we recently undertook a new restoration project in that area. And because of those restoration projects, We want to make sure to maintain the deer population at the lower end of the desirable population range to make sure we're getting our native plant community established and also getting natural tree regeneration. So as I mentioned, we'd like to conduct sharpshooting this upcoming winter in the East Central Unit and specifically at Terrace Oaks Park due to the active habitat restoration with a maximum removal of 7 deer. And then we'd like to continue with the Kelleher Park archery hunt in southwest Burnsville with a maximum removal of 13 deer. And that would be our Metro Bow Hunters resource base hunt. And we would like the commissioners to review and hopefully approve our proposed archery hunt dates for Kelleher Park. So we propose 4 hunt periods. All dates would be Thursday through Saturday dates. And then the actual dates would be September 29th through October 1st, October 13th through 17th, October 27th through 29th, and November 10th through November 12th. And that covers the main portion of the program. So with that, I'd take any questions.
Questions, comments from commissioners?
Just one question. What was the thought process behind selecting the dates?
These are dates that are similar to what we've been using for many years. And I think we selected dates that were in the fall, late fall, because it's not as popular of a time for people to be using the park. And then they selected Thursday through Saturday dates, so there would be one day on the weekend where other people who aren't archery hunting would be able to utilize the park. So we're trying to get benefit out of the archery hunts, but also still allow some use of the park during that time frame.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Johnson?
Are there established hours at which they can hunt?
Yes, during the hunt period, it's essentially per DNR regulations. I think it's around sunrise or half hour before sunrise until sunset. So during the hunt days, the park is essentially closed the entire day.
Yeah, Commissioner, go ahead.
Oh, I was just curious, I mean, when you look at your table comparing the last 10 years of the number of deer, there's never been a number lower than 150, and we're at 56 this year. I'm just curious, do you look at like Apple Valley and Lakeville and see if their counts have gone up in their aerial views? Or it was such a mild summer, I'm just kind of surprised by the numbers. Or are you not surprised by these numbers?
We were a little surprised by the numbers. I did mention there are some variables that can potentially account for some of that. Most of our neighboring cities don't have counts to compare to. There is one count that's operated by the Three Rivers Park District in Murphy-Hanrahan Park. So we can compare their numbers, and they found more deer within Murphy-Hanrahan Park than they typically do. Typically during their survey, they often find deer at the periphery of the park or within the Burnsville city limits or some of the other city limits that border their park, but less deer within the park because of higher snow cover. They tend to move towards the edges. This year, because of low snow cover, the deer were more concentrated within the park, which is outside of our survey area. So that may account for some of the deer that weren't in Burnsville this year because they were within the main portion of Murphy-Hanrahan Park in that particular area of town rather than on the edge of the park within Burnsville city limits.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm surprised with the number at 56 that we're going to be removing any deer, actually.
Yeah, and we do look at each management zone separately. So in some management zones, we're not doing any removals. And in the management zones where we are doing removals, it is specifically because we do have active habitat restoration projects in those areas. And we feel it's important to maintain the deer population at the lower end of the range to make sure we're not getting overbrowsing by deer in our restoration areas.
True, but they seem to roam, and I'm just wondering, is it such a big area you can't fence it in, or?
Fencing it in would be a fairly big endeavor because they are decent-sized areas. So it would be a big challenge to fence them in. Deer fencing has to be very tall because deer are very adept at jumping. So it's pretty difficult to fence a large area like that, and the fencing takes constant maintenance because trees fall on it and other issues like that. So we found that the easiest solution would be to do our removals in those areas.
Thank you. Commissioner Nachman?
No, thank you.
Okay. I have a question, more of a comment about some of the hazards that deer pose. You mentioned car crashes and depredation of vegetation. And deer are also known for transporting, carrying deer ticks. I mean, they could be carried by any wild animal, but deer certainly move around a lot more than some of the smaller mammals do. And for the first time this year, I did find a deer tick on one of my pets, and I live in the west central area. So I think it's important for the public to know if there's information going out about deer population and deer safety for the city of Burnsville. That is something that the public is aware of, that we have deer and we also have these deer ticks that they should be checking for or treating their pets for, that sort of thing. And I'm wondering if that's in any of the literature, either online, about Burnsville's deer program, that you know of?
I don't think it's currently in any of our online information, but it's certainly something that we could add. And as you mentioned, it is important to make sure park users are aware that there's potential for deer ticks in our park. So that's a good comment. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions, comments from commissioners at this time? Okay, seeing none, what we're looking for is a recommendation to continue the deer management program with no changes to the current plan. Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
It is moved, and a second. All,
Commissioners, I believe they also need
to approve the dates.
to approve the dates, correct?
Okay, so in addition to moving forward with this current plan, do we also have the motion to include approval of the dates?
Yes.
We do, and a second. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye as well, and the motion carries. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very well, Kayla, for your time and your presentation.
Thank you for having me.
With that, that brings us to the next item of the evening, which is miscellaneous.
Commissioners, you'll be happy to know that Phase 2 of the Bicentennial Garden Project has been completed. And in fact, it was open for a Memorial Day event on Monday, the 30th. I know Commissioner Nachman's been watching that project very closely. I don't know, Commissioner Nachman, if you have any other comments on the project?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment and say to the folks that redid the Bicentennial Garden, did an outstanding job. There was a meeting with the public, and we had some comments, and the city was very responsive to some of those, and I think the garden really looks nice now that they got rid of the sundial.
Next item, Commissioners, there will be a new commissioner training on Tuesday, June 28th, right here in the council chambers at 6:30. Although all of you are returning commissioners, you are still welcome to attend and take part in that training. And then our July meeting has been moved to the 18th of July due to the 4th of July holiday. So that is all that I have.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Nachman?
I'd like to go back to the comment about the stormwater pollution and just ask a few questions. First of all, the word pollution control, you know, and everything that we've heard really doesn't talk about pollution in the ponds. It talks about prevention, but if no one really knows what the pollution is, I think that should be looked into. Do some kind of survey, testing water quality and the chemicals and all those bad things that, you know, get washed down the road. Second, I like to see during the year, since there are 384 ponds, I'm not sure anybody really knows that there are that many. And I'd like to see a report to the public instead of just saying we come and look at them and, you know, raise the question of, you know, the algae blooms. We are blessed with fast algae blooms, and some are really worse than others, and you can't really project them. But we should look into some of the local ponds and see if animals are dying off or what's been, you know, happening. And I don't know of any, but I just like to see the water quality in terms of contact reported to the public. And, you know, we have a quarterly reports that are sent out to everybody in Burnsville. And I'd like to ask if the folks that are dealing with the pond issue could put together something that would show where these ponds are. You know, we talk about deer, we could do the same northeast, southeast, where these little ponds are, and maybe put some issues on that if people don't know what the criteria are, say, you know, some ponds are much clearer than others, and they change drastically over the years. So the other point that I have is there's a major difference between what's happening in our lakes and what's happening in our ponds. The Burnsville is, you know, because of the size of the lakes, and it opened this to all the public, whereas ponds are more local. I like to have ponds as a separate context than lakes. I think we've done a great job with the lakes in Burnsville. And, you know, unless we've had one issue that came to the Park Commission dealing with a lake or a pond this past year. And I don't really know what the follow-up was at, and if the issue is how do, instead of having people come in large groups with you know, specialists that can afford, areas that can afford specialists, and some areas don't. So I think that we need to look at the sort of, I'm not sure what the word is, but ability of all ponds to be treated equally. I know we hear that term a lot this year. But anyway, just the ponds in Burnsville are a major asset to our natural resources and parks. So I just like, maybe we could get the folks to, instead of just doing a numbers report, doing something that has more of a content.
Commissioner Nachman, I think that'd be a great addition for our discussion at the end of the year and the items that we want to tackle for the year to come, so for 2017. And maybe at that time, we can really drill down what it is, you just said, that what it is you want to look for in that type of report, so that Daryl and Caleb and Ron Leaf can come back with the exact information that you're looking for. I know they did I think we had a work session on it a year ago, maybe two, and I think that maybe was enough for that at that time. But if we're looking for more, we can certainly drill that down and set up a time where they can come in and present the information that you're looking for in 2017.
I'd just like you to understand my perspective is the folks that are up there and are doing a good job as best they can. And, you know, it's not fair to jump on an issue and say, this is the most important thing and we have to have it done. But it's something that, you know, we look at the word pollution, and it seemed to be a naughty word when I was asking questions about pollution. You know, pollution is maybe clarity and all that, but I think it's a little more important than that, because at least one or two ponds that I've known for about 40 years, the water quality has gone from, you know, 100 to maybe 10. And it's, some people like me are just interested in limnology and the water quality. So please don't think that I'm attacking the group. The group is really a good bunch of people and work hard. You know, you're suggesting at the end of the year, maybe we can look this up and make some suggestions, because I think the parks do not get enough, the natural resources rather, don't get enough coverage in our publications that come up to the city.
And if I could add, in the interest of public education and the pollution, fertilizer that you put on your lawn is pollution. And the excess nitrogen and phosphorus it adds to the stormwater drains, and that leads to a lot of these water quality issues. So I think that would help too. to make sure that that's in the literature and in the presentations that reaches the public, that that's a form of pollution that they can help to mitigate. So I support going forward with having extra work sessions and presentations to get this information out.
We'll add that to the list.
Additional comments in miscellaneous period here? Seeing none, that brings us to the end of our formal meeting agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
And a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye as well, and the motion carries. Brings us to an end of the meeting. Thank you all for attending or watching the Burnsville Parks and Natural Resources Commission meeting.